This week's episode contains content dealing with sexual violence and is adult in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. If you or someone you know needs help processing things in this area, please use the resources on the screen or linked in the description to be connected with licensed professionals. What is going on, South by East fans and fam? Welcome to Traffic Reports on the South by East podcast, where we talk about the culture, the scriptures, and everywhere in between. Jonathan is out this week. And as we get ready to jump into this week's topic, a really quick disclaimer. I am doing this with the assumption that the majority of our viewers are adults. And so I want to give us this kind of disclaimer. If you are, some of the nature of some of what we're talking about today deals with sexual violence and trauma. I am not going to be overly graphic, but if this is something that is triggering to you, or if you have children around and you don't necessarily want to dive into some of these topics with them around, you don't want to have those conversations later, I would advise you to watch this at a later time. So making sure that you're in the right space mentally and in proximity. And so I wanted to give you a few seconds to turn this off or switch this up before we jump into this topic. All right, there we go. Now, today we're going to be talking about the recent Kanye West tweet that came out earlier this month. Kanye West is no stranger for tweeting crazy or unhinged things that cause people to question, but this one had a bit of a different flavor to it. I'm going to read just a little bit of this article here, and then we're going to jump into what was said. So Kanye West opened up about an alleged sexual experience that he had with his cousin as a kid, saying that the memory from his childhood inspired his upcoming song, Cousins. The stronger rapper alleged that he had a relationship with one of his relatives as a kid, and he's talking about it on this song. This song is called Cousins, he said, about my cousin that's locked up in jail for committing a violent act on a lady a few years after I told him we wouldn't look at dirty magazines together anymore. The Grammy winner went on to say that he felt responsible for engaging in the activity with his cousin, who he did not identify, thank God. Perhaps in my self-centered mess, I felt it was my fault that I showed him those dirty magazines when he was 6. And then he goes on to say that he committed sexual acts with his cousin until he was 14. There are two things that I think are important to discuss here. Number one is, in the Christian community, we would call our witness. People's response to this message from Kanye has been majorly negative, which I can understand. When you are the person who praises Hitler as a genius, the person who constantly shouts out xenophobic and homophobic and racist things from the highest mountaintops, using your platform to platform hate, it is understandable that people would see most of the things you do as attention-seeking, juvenile, asinine, and even evil. And I would be among that number. I stopped listening to Ye's music a few years ago, and have been really critical of him for years before that. But in this particular message, I saw something slightly different. So it's really important that we understand that our character informs how people see our content. Our character informs how people see our content. And that's really important, because sometimes when we have something that people actually need to hear, they won't hear it from us. So as I was processing some of the content of his tweet, it hit me kind of heavy, and I'll tell you why. I've shared a little bit on here and in other spaces that I was also exposed to pornography early on when I was in elementary school. After I was exposed to pornography, I also shared it with a family member too. This hit me heavy because I've had similar experiences. Not exactly like what Kanye went through, but I've had similar experiences in my life. When I was in middle school, I dealt with a sexual assault. And I didn't tell anyone about it. You know why? Because the landscape of us talking about sexual traumas and damages, especially when it comes to young boys, is awful. We are really bad at having these conversations. When I got older, a friend of mine actually admitted that he had been sexually assaulted by a teacher when he was younger. And he told a group of friends. And you know what that group of friends did? They congratulated him. They said, man, you must have been doing something right. My friend told me later on, he was like, man, I just went out and got drunk that night. I didn't know how to process that. In my own encounter, it was with another student, someone else that was older than me. We were at an event, couldn't swim very well, so I couldn't get away, and was forced to do some things that I didn't want to do. I didn't know if I should tell someone because I wasn't sure if what had happened was wrong or not. Because the conversations that we have around sexual trauma, especially as it relates to young men, is terrible. Ye is not a role model in any terms. He's not. And I don't think that he's probably going to do this conversation justice. I don't. But it is a conversation that needs to happen. I had read a message from a clinical therapist who had posted about this, and they said that the conversations that we have around sexual violence, especially with binary terms like victim and perpetrator, are so unhelpful that often they put people who have experienced trauma in a position where they're afraid to even talk about what has happened, let alone get help for it. I spend the majority of my time talking about my mental health. I spend the majority of my time putting it into music and going out and doing concerts and helping other people process. I've been in therapy probably since I was 5. I have never processed the sexual traumas in my life. I haven't shared it with my therapist. You've never heard about it in any of my songs. I have a hard time talking about this. When I was young, my mom was in therapy. She talked about her mental health issues and she worked through those things. And so I had an example of what that looks like. But in conversations like this, I've never heard someone say what happened to Ye. And when I read that post from that therapist, they said the story that Ye has shared statistically as someone who works in that field is not uncommon. That's the first time I ever heard that what happened with me, to me, in my life wasn't unique to me. The first time. It shouldn't be this way. It shouldn't be this way. And I don't have any nice bow to wrap this in for you. I don't have any pithy quotes to give you on this. And you might be saying, okay, so Brail, why did you even bring this up if you weren't going to be ready to tackle the topic? And I'll tell you why. Because it's a conversation that needs to be had. I'm going to take this up with my therapist when I meet with them next week. And I'm going to start processing this. And I'm probably going to write a song about it. And I'm going to add that to my repertoire of things that I can share and my testimony of things that I've healed from. But I know that there are those who are watching this, who are hearing this, who have stories similar to mine, who have stories similar to Ye's. And even though I don't like the messenger, and I don't think that he's going to tackle this well, and I'm not fully equipped to tackle it, I think it's important that we start having the conversations. Or maybe it's not. I would like to know where you guys are at in the comments. Do you think it's time to start having some of these conversations around sexual trauma and ethics in our communities? Or is this something that should just be dealt with privately? I'm all right with people who disagree. But let's have the conversation. Let's start somewhere. I'll see you down in the comments. Continue to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next week in the intersection.